How's my hair here?
You look great.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Welcome to Deep Focus, a radio show about movies and New Haven. I'm your host, Tom Breen. On today's review-only episode of the show, I'll be joined by New Haven Independent staff writer Alan Appel for a discussion of two new releases. Wait, Alan, did you want to jump in there, or?
I did. I wanted to say hi, Tom.
Oh, that's allowed. Hello, Alan.
Thank you. That's all I have to say.
For a discussion of two new releases starring Israeli women whose characters brush aside the fatuous hindrances of patriarchy to realize miracles of female strength and ingenuity. The latest blockbuster comic book adaptation Wonder Woman and the Israeli romantic comedy The Wedding Plan. Welcome again to the show, Alan. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for catching up with these movies and coming back.
Thanks for making me go see them.
Okay, so on the face of it, these movies seem like an unlikely pair to review side by side. Wonder Woman, directed by Patty Jenkins and starring Israeli actress, martial artist, model Gal Gadot as the eponymous DC Comics superheroine, is a $100 million action spectacle about an Amazon-trained warrior goddess, committed to peace, yet consistently embroiled in earth-shattering violence. And The Wedding Plan, directed by Rama Burstein and starring Noah Kaler, is a small Israeli romantic comedy about a religious Jewish woman named Michal in her early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, who's grown tired of a decade of dating and decides to get married on the 8th night of Hanukkah, even though she does not yet have a groom. And yet, both movies are directed by women, starring women, featuring stories of women who thrive in traditionally male realms by turning potentially confining expectations in war and religious marriage into opportunities of stubborn resilience and hard-won respect. So, Alan, my question for you is, which of these female superstars did you find most compelling? And if you had to pick one person most likely to achieve the seemingly impossible, would you go with Diana Prince, a.k.a. Wonder Woman, or the soon-to-be-wed Michal and her traveling petting zoo?
Oh, I'm totally with Michal. I mean, I guess I don't surprise you by saying that. I saw Wonder Woman, I guess, earlier in the weekend. Usually I have a kind of afterglow when I see a movie. I think about it, something sticks with me. I'll be surprised some image will emerge when I'm doing something else. In spite of the incredible amount of action and the kind of ear-splitting and eye-opening stuff the movie provides, it was a total blank in the reverberations department. Whereas the Wedding Plan, which is, by the way, their American version of what it is in Hebrew. I know a little Hebrew, so it was fun to watch it. The Hebrew name for the film is, let me see if we have any Hebrew listeners, La'avor et Hakir, which means to break through the wall, which in fact is a phrase she uses. So the short answer is...
You're going with Michal to achieve the impossible?
No, what did you say in your introduction, how you linked these two in the very first line? I thought that this is interesting to talk about these movies, but you link them, but it's almost, what did you say about them?
Well, I've got characters Israeli women, who play, so both of these actresses are Israeli, who brush aside the fatuous hindrances of patriarchy to realize miracles of female strength.
Yes, miracles of female strength. But
and that drives so well. I didn't know the literal Hebrew translation for The Wedding Plan, but you said to break through.
Right, but what's interesting apropos of the superhero is that is not a wedding plan term. To break through the wall is a Kabbalistic term, and in many ways she really is a superhero, because she's what's wonderful about this movie is is that it takes you inside this religious sect. It's really the Hasidic sect that kind of worships the Breslov guy, Chaim of Bratslav. And she feels if she has enough faith, if she has superhuman faith, God will provide a groom. And that's the kind of superheroics that she's performing. But in fact, it's utterly a realistic film and takes you deep in the heart of really a women's world. I must say that what the comparison really to me brought to mind is some writing teacher of mine ages ago said, paraphrasing somebody, do you know the difference between drama and melodrama? Have we talked about this before?
No.
The answer to the question is melodrama takes what is extraordinary and makes it seem ordinary, whereas drama takes the ordinary and makes it seem extraordinary.
what a beautiful description for how, I think, for both of these two movies. I think that for The Wedding Plan, it falls pretty squarely in that ordinary rendered extraordinary, and maybe Wonder Woman is a bit closer to the extraordinary rendered relatively banal. But we are clearly on the wrong side of history and politics and contemporary movie culture in our thoughts and money. I was talking with Harry before I came in the show, and Wonder Woman is a universally beloved movie, and I think for a lot of great reasons. So Wonder Woman is the first comic book movie which has become by far the kind of biggest and most important Hollywood genre over the past decade and a half. It's the first comic book movie to center on a woman in 12 years, since I think Catwoman with Halle Berry and then this one called Elektra, also from about 12 years ago. So that is, and since then we've had this onslaught of the Iron Mans, the DC Comics, the Marvel Studios movies. Some of them better than others, all of them following relatively similar generic templates, but to have none of them focus pretty exclusively on female protagonists, this is quite a breakthrough. On top of that, we have a female director. I think in the opening weekend, and it's like 100, 200 million, whatever the box office was, this is the most that a movie directed by a woman has ever garnered in the opening box office. So those achievements in terms of box office success, I think are not, we're talking about movies which are always these compromises between commerce and art and entertainment. So I think it is important to recognize that one measure of success for a movie is its box office appeal, and Wonder Woman is certainly succeeding there. This is also a really, it is a fun and funnily written movie. There is a lot of critics have been comparing this to the kind of earlier screwball comedy style of writing, where you have extended sequences between the Chris Pine and Gal Gadot characters where nothing is really furthering the plot, but there's so much kind of sexual tension in the air between the two of them that you do get a sense of a spark. There's character development and not necessarily plot. And sometimes these movies are so weighed down by plot. It's just like constantly moving inexorably towards like fighting absolute evil. It was nice that this movie took a few times, just to, I don't remember that sequence where he emerges from the hot tub and they talk about how he is an above average man, where they're lying on a boat as they're sailing back into like the humanly world, and they're talking about how she as a goddess has read all 12 volumes on like the nature of humanly pleasure.
Well,
so those bits of banter I find refreshing in the context of a comic book movie. But it doesn't make me appreciate the genre of comic book movies anymore, because they always catapult towards, again, being a prologue for the next example of the expanded universe of DC Comics. Everything's building up to what we're going to spend money on next time. And then always these, massive action sequences where you defeat absolute evil only to be confronted next time with another incarnation of absolute evil.
Right. It's the very definition of what is not a good plot. It's not upping the ante, it's repetition. But you're right. Those are all nice achievements that you enumerated, including the business of the banter and that kind of stuff, as opposed to just racing even faster.
And I want to say that we are two men talking about two exclusively female movies. We are going to fail in providing a female perspective on this. So however many times I say this is not a feminist picture, I recognize that I'm a dude commenting upon this. So listeners,
Well,
thank you for
wait.
your forbearance.
I take a little exception to that. We all have some female in us, and all females have some male in us. And, I would say, for example, I think that what you described as the movie, one of the movie's stars that are merits that we can give it as opposed to demerits is that it does take a little more time for the characters to interact and to banter and to be, striving to be Beatrice to Benedict, but and that reflects, I think, the fact that you have a woman directing it and being in charge of it. She takes the time before they rush off to the next impossible physical feat. But let's be honest. Most of the press about this is reviewing the box office. They're not reviewing the issues of narrative and stuff like that. And even Jill Lepore, the world's expert on the Wonder Woman, wrote the book on that. She said, it was a kind of grudging, forgive me, I have to say I like this, even though it's a little weird that I'm watching 2 hours this woman putting on a tiara and thigh-high boots and beating the crap out of guys for 2 hours. I mean, she knows what it is.
So the Wonder Woman it's a 2.5 hour movie. So it's a movie that fits the. Again, I mean, this is how these comic book movies work, right? And you look at any major summer blockbuster, they're bloated in every single version of that word. And so the first third of this movie takes place on this kind of magical, lush, idyllic island where Amazonian women train in martial arts. And there's certainly a lot of intensity and ferocity there, but there's no violence in the way that we experience it a bit later on in the movie in the trenches of the Western Front in Belgium. But why do they set it? Why does it have to be in World War I with the bad Germans? I don't understand that choice either. I think it's one more way.
Could be anywhere, anytime.
Well, I think it's one more way of having this movie function as a prelude to the next episode. I mean, if we, in our kind of high-level understanding of history, know that World War I is a harbinger for World War II, I think it's one more way of setting up. Here we're going to have an even more dramatic confrontation when we have Wonder Woman combat the Nazis in the next episode. Here we get to start off with the Kaiser's goons.
I know, and I was going to ask you what your favorite portion of the movie is. For me, the movie totally shifts. It shifts this location from this mythological island where here comes the male perspective. Why do these Amazons have 2 breasts and not one? I thought the Amazons were supposed to have 1 breast so they could pull back the bow without interference. So I don't get that.
I don't have a well.
Where's the continuity girl to help us with this?
Right, so we can confirm that the Amazonians are 2-breasted in this, however mythologically inaccurate that may be. But again, I mean, for that, I think that opening section is also heralded as, we are bombarded with images of these kind of super masculine superheroes for the past decade and a half, where we have, these men beating the crap out of each other and, dressed to the nines and all of this armor and whatnot. And here we have a female analog that on the face of it presents a refreshing new, feminine perspective on what a comic book hero and an all-female kind of universe of superheroes could look like. But I find that a completely unsatisfying approach to mixing up what comic book movies offer. In that if you just put women in the exact same roles as men and they're doing the exact same thing with the exact same kind of violent and frenetic maneuvers, except they happen to be women instead of men. Yeah, I get that that's an achievement in terms of representation, but I don't think that it changes our perspective on the violence at the core of these movies.
What's the value added from the so-called feminist perspective?
Yeah.
So they chit-chat before she beats the crap out of people. Is that part of it? Certainly the presentation of the all-female Amazonian society is quite wonderful. Mm-hmm. But once in New York, I went to review an all-female Macbeth. It was done by a company that said, I think basically what the creators of Wonder Woman said, we can do this too. So they had these women. Everybody was a woman, from Duncan to Macbeth, and they were doing high fives and chest thumping and beating the crap out of each other. And it was kind of interesting to watch because it was different, but I struggle to find the value added in terms of the story, or apart from the kind of political feminist point that was being made.
So the big kind of value add that I thought worked really well within the context of the movie, and also as I thought outside of the context of the movie, and thought about how is this representation of women kind of furthering some sort of conversation around like gender equality in the real world. And that is a trope that recurs a number of times throughout the movie, which is whenever a man, usually the Chris Pine kind of male pilot hero character, turns to Wonder Woman and says, hold on a second, I have to handle this, I'll be right back, I just have to deal with these guys in Parliament, or I have to deal with these soldiers in the trench, just stay right there and I'll be right back. How I thought those scenes were going to end up would be Wonder Woman either waiting for a second, and then we cut to the next scene, and then we see him back. I didn't think that was likely. What I thought really was going to happen was Wonder Woman would kind of make an argument for why she deserved to be, in that room in Parliament fighting alongside Chris Pine. But no, this is a fish out of water story where she is not accustomed to the social conventions of World War I era London. She doesn't argue for her right to be there. She just kind of pushes aside whoever's in her way and says, I'm Wonder Woman. I, in fact, am deserving to be in this room, and it's not a matter of debate right now. I'm just going to put myself right there. That I found quite refreshing. And I've heard a number of times where there's no debate as to whether or not a woman deserves to be in the decision-making room, but rather her just thrusting herself to the front because, after all, she is Wonder Woman. She is the most qualified to be handling any of these conversations and actions around how to protect whatever army is in need of protection at the time.
But one of the questions that I've not seen discussed in any of the reviews, but then again, the reviews, as I mentioned, really don't talk about the issues of narrative and much about the storyline, is that in many ways the true moment of heroism in this movie, despite Wonder Woman's incredible bracelets that repel bullets, I mean, the true moment of heroism belongs to the man, because the Chris Pine character, the pilot, is flying this airplane full of all this toxic gas, and the only way it can be disposed of without harming humanity, which the Wonder Woman is supposed to save, is if it's exploded selflessly, which he kills himself up in the sky. He does that, and now is that a female virtue that happens to be embodied in Chris Pine, or is it just it strikes me as just a it's a soldier doing his ultimate duty.
I don't think we have to equate heroism with kind of mortal self-sacrifice explicitly. I mean, this is an interesting problem that all, I guess, superhero movies face, is that most of these heroes and heroines are immortal or nearly indestructible in some way. So for them to offer their bodies for kind of complete annihilation, it's going to be impossible for Wonder Woman to do in the exact same way. I think that she demonstrates certainly throughout, she demonstrates this incredible courage and ability on the battlefield. But I think when she decides to leave the magical island for the real world, it's motivated by a kind of fantastical anticipation of what she will find and what she'll be able to do. But I think that takes quite a bit of heroism, courage and heroism, to leave an area of relative peace and repose to throw yourself into one of pretty intense conflict and danger.
Well, she wants to save humanity. She I guess that makes her different from the other Amazons. She has a kind of social justice agenda in her genes.
She just feels like a moral imperative to realize. This is another interesting kind of contradiction within Wonder Woman. She is quite explicitly a woman, a weapon for peace, right? And yet all she does and all she seems to be surrounded is incredible violence.
Well, she needs havoc, right? That's the problem. The other issue is I guess this must be for all. I don't know the genre very well. It's full disclosure. But as you hinted at a moment ago, if she's immortal, and it turns out that she is the daughter of Zeus, we find out in the end, which makes her, I guess, fully immortal. Then what's to worry about? There's no vulnerability. It's not like what's his name, Hector, where you could get him on the plains of Troy, because he did have a vulnerable human part for the arrow to hit his heel.
Sure.
But what's to get at? The only thing that seems to bother her is possibility of sex with a human or something, which, but she has no, she in her fighting with Ares, the ultimate. I mean,
I thought there was real sexual chemistry between these guys. I thought that was a part of the. I mean, considering how poorly romantic relationships these comic movies tend to get, maybe outside of Iron Man and the Gwyneth Paltrow character in that series, I think these movies tend to miss any type of spark between any character.
There was some here, and you know what it reminded me of in a very pale form, but it reminded me a bit of. I can't remember the name of the film, but Greta Garbo plays a communist agent who comes to Paris.
Ninotchka.
It's Ninotchka, and she is she shows up wearing just plain brown garb and is uninterested in love, but she hangs out with her comrades. But Melvyn Douglas, who has to show her around, it's as if they're translating words. They're from different planets, and there is some of that interesting tension when people cross the divide with each other slowly. That's true.
You know, we recently spoke about a movie called Their Finest, which I think we were both quite big fans of, about the female screenwriters in the Ministry of Information in World War II. And I think that is a much more, also, a movie directed by a woman, Lynn Cherfick, about a female protagonist. And I think the way that we see the female screenwriters' influence on the development of the female characters in her movie is much more of a testament to what a kind of more feminine or alternative perspective on what a war movie could be like than what we see here in Wonder Woman.
Right. It's as if the female director says, "I'm going to jump into this all-male, testosterone juiced up, and I'm going to show female testosterone, so to speak." And
which takes a lot of chutzpah.
Which is nice. But once you show you can do it, I think it's going to be a challenge to keep this interesting as they go forward.
Can we just spend 1 second more on the visual strategy of this movie, because I think that it played a very important role in my ultimate fatigue with it, and that's in that
you call it visual strategy.
So this is I think quite common to comic book movies. And I think harking back to how these characters are depicted in actual comic books, in that Wonder Woman is constantly presented in the most iconic of poses, right? She is flying towards the camera, she is landing with one knee on the ground and another foot planted firmly. I feel like it was a series of 2.5 hours of these very muscular, impressive poses, and not necessarily, there's an odd staticness to someone who can fly and who can move so freely. And I think that is a drawback of movies that are so faithful to comic book style representations of characters, where you are getting individual frames on the page. And just to be constantly kind of freeze framed on these poses that are meant to be impressive, I found kind of beautiful to look at points, but very distracting in terms of my understanding of a character moving in space and interacting with people.
Well, I would say even more than distracting. I think it undermines the sequences in the film when she's not iconic and like a god standing on roads. I mean, when she when she strides through Parliament or whatever, wearing her gown, it's like you're looking at her and it doesn't fit on her, because you look at her and you think of her in her mythological suit. But I'll tell you, the thing that really confused me, and maybe because I came to this without the background of the story, is that the opening sequences have her at a job at the Louvre. I mean, you open up with the Louvre, the pyramids, and she is, we don't get very much here, but we find out with a similar, 30-second scene at the end. She's apparently an antiquities curator, and seeing a photograph taken during the narrative of the movie, it's being brought to her, and that triggers the whole movie. In a sense, it's in recollection. But are we supposed to take from this that she's living among us as a curator, sort of like Clark Kent, which I would have loved. I would have loved his, or the Batman. I guess that's not part of this particular genre, but it would have been wonderful for her to be in real life and how she would conduct herself. But we never see her.
Instead, she's just preserved in this beautiful art museum in the way that other, monumental achievements and
Exactly.
creativity are.
Exactly.
And of beauty, she's just kind of confined in this back room office at the Louvre.
It seemed like a phony frame,
Yeah.
totally. And I don't. And yeah. Anyway,
Well, let's let's get on to the movie that we did like. Not that listeners, not that we hated Wonder Woman, but I think for a movie that has received pretty universal acclaim, I think it's good to offer a counter perspective to that applause. But first, I want to say you're listening to Deep Focus on WNHH LP, Newton's Home for Community Radio. I'm your host, Tom Breen. I'm talking with Alan Appel about 2 new summer releases now playing at the movie theater in downtown New Haven.
about women and by women.
About women and by women. Now, the one we're going to talk about next is, again, I tend to be pretty apprehensive going into comic book movies. I know it's a genre that I'm not crazy about. I don't know much about. I'm never too big of a comic book fan, so it always has to win me over. The exact same is true of romantic comedies. I like romantic comedies, but it's not a genre that I seek out, not when I feel particular affinity for. And yet, the wedding plan, and let alone kind of marriage, farces, romantic comedy, this one really did win me over. Really from the very start. And I think it is because in the very first scene of this movie, we get so much communicated about the character through action. And that thing about, so we open...
And the character and her world.
And her world. We see this woman in her late 20s, early 30s who goes to, I'm not sure of what role the woman that she visits in opening scene.
She's a matchmaker.
Is she a matchmaker? She's kind of like a
matchmaker.
soothsayer. I mean, she's offering these more, she's kind of reading the tea leaves for her, as opposed to putting her in touch with any, maybe she's putting her in touch with men later on. She definitely is part of the matchmaking process. But there's no man at this meeting, right?
Well, except her son, who she will
who makes a
ultimately
brief
marry.
appearance.
But no, you're right. This is
But
not the first thing she does is she comes in and she's forced to knead dough and to punch dough.
And what do we see? We see her just wailing against this dough.
She's like a therapist for women who can't find husbands, an Orthodox
Right.
Jewish occupational therapist or something to get it out of her system, and then she sits.
Oh wait, but before she says that, I want to say that, so she's beating against this dough. She's about to talk to a woman who's going to help her, find a match so that she can no longer be in her early 30s and unmarried. When she's told to pack up a piece of dough and put it to the side, she offers a very brief, quiet prayer at putting aside the food. So in about 30 seconds, we find out this is a woman with a lot of pent-up aggression and also a religious woman. A woman who is going to... I love that we're not told that you are a religious, angry woman. Instead, we see her pray and we see her beat up the dough.
And you don't know quite what these rituals mean. It's not even for those who kind of know this world. It is, as you indicate, strange because after she kneads the dough, the next rite or sequence that the matchmaker, older woman, makes her go through is to sit down between them and a very small table is some stinking fish, and then the matchmaker or soothsayer or marriage broker woman, using, these are magical qualities, mystical things. She takes some of the blood of the fish or something like that, or some material from the fish and puts it on her face, and even though the woman, our heroine resists because the fish stinks, she does it, and then it's wiped off. But anyway, what it establishes is that she's willing to do almost anything to change her status.
But it's also, it demonstrates, again, getting to how she, her religious faith is communicated in that opening scene. It gets to her willingness to do anything, but also her faith in kind of mystical and obscure processes to further what she sees as her faith. Right?
That's right.
She's not even, her argument throughout, so this is a woman who's constantly trying to get married. Her argument is not that she wants to be married or that she has to be married. It's kind of like, my life is one in which I am married. And I think that to think of how central marriage is and family life is in the world of religious Judaism, I found that quite poignant, that it wasn't a matter of choice really. And she is not choosing to get married at a certain point. She knows that she has to get married. This is a critical necessary part of her existence.
But,
And-
but one of the triumphs of the movie is that it's not it's both a critique of that world, but it's also a loving embrace of that world, which I think is the point of view of the character. You know, Tom, I think one of the reasons why your trepidation about romantic comedy was not fulfilled is it's really not a romantic comedy. It's a kind of comedy of religious manners in a way. And actually, we were talking as we were getting ready for the show about that. If you or I think differently about a movie, if we're going to write about it as opposed to talk about it, and so I came up actually with the lead that I would have used for this movie if I were writing a review of it. It goes like this: if Jane Austen had been a Breslover Hasidic woman, she would have written this story.
I think that is right on.
It's totally Jane Austen-y. And because we get to learn all about this girl's sisters and their marriage hopes. I mean, if this movie weren't inspired by Jane Austen, if one interviewed Bernstein, the woman who I think wrote it and directed it, I'd be shocked.
Mm-hmm. And you are totally, I think you're right on in making that comparison, and in particular, in what I've found to be the strongest parts of otherwise quite a strong movie, were the dating sequences. Instead of a montage of kind of silly and farcical interactions with lampoonable people, here we have, again, definitely satirical commentary upon the structure in which these people are trying to meet, right? The forced interactions, but also all of the different tics and all the different, again, going back to the opening scene where she puts her faith in having like fish blood splattered upon her face is somehow helping her find a marriage. I love each different potential groom's take on what they think will lead to a successful marriage.
Well, and that in fact is the structure of the movie. It's like a charm bracelet of different sort of J-date moments.
Do you have a favorite among the?
Yes, I do. I do. When a Japanese guy, a recent convert, shows up and opens the door, and she looks at him, and she says nothing, and he says nothing, and the camera goes back and forth, and there's nothing to say.
So I did.
And then there's a deaf guy,
right.
And then
What
there's,
a poignant scene! That can we dwell on that one in particular?
oh, they're always
because
poignant.
She is set up with another man who, through this matchmaking service. He's deaf. I think he's a psychologist for the deaf. I think that's what he identifies his profession as. But he has his interpreter or signer sitting next to him at this dinner table, and they're bantering, they're laughing, they're having a good time, and the deaf man, asks her why she decided to meet up with him now, and she answers honestly because this is a woman who, if anything, values honesty above all else. Even when she's not being honest with herself or with others,
which is an Austen characteristic.
Right. She knows that a relationship for her cannot be based, and this is, I think, gets to what is a admirable, maybe feminist quality or implication of this movie, in that the fundamental assumption that this woman has and this movie has is that a relationship has to be founded upon mutual respect and honesty. And you know that if you are relying upon a religious superstructure, a social superstructure, or any kind of magical tics, that's not going to lead to anything more than kind of infatuation or happenstance. But so she answers honestly, right? She says, I thought it would be too difficult to be with a man who is deaf. And we don't even need to hear the response, right? We just see him sign, and then we see his interpreter slightly shake his head so as not to have to communicate what he just signed to her.
Right, and
it's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking, and what's wonderful is that she believes that she is going to have someone there. She believes it so much that, and not that she isn't disappointed and worried, but to me, one of the most fascinating moments of the movie is when she actually gets on an airplane. She only has about 3 weeks from the time she makes this announcement, which kind of makes her whole world rock, and they're amused with what she's doing. But she goes to the shrine of Nachman of Bratslav, the kind of godfather of her sect, or whatever it is, the founder of the sect in what today is Ukraine. And she throws herself along with these other totally devoted religious women against kind of a screen.
And it's a moment of despair. Right?
Total despair.
Says that she has lost her faith at this moment. She's lost any chance of, hoping to find a partner. And she's at this religious monument, and yet she is totally, uncertain about every single aspect of her identity that she was trying to
Right.
construct.
And then what happens, the despair has brought her to this point where she's sort of mumbling and talking to God. It's a very religious moment. And she hears a voice coming across the other way, and it's a man's voice. And it turns out it's a guy she knows who's a totally secular guy. I guess she knew him before she got
No. She didn't know him. This is the guy who's singing on the TV in the opening scene. He's a pop star.
But they know each other from school or
I
something.
don't think so. I think she just knows him for his music. She's like a big fan of listening to this guy on the radio. I don't think that this could be a different interpretation, but I think that she's confronted. It's like if you ran into a Rihanna or something, or a Justin, someone who, like a pop star who you listen to on the radio, and then all of a
Right.
sudden he's making overtures to you.
He's making overtures to her because she tells him, and she tells everybody else, that I'm going to be married, and this is the time, 8th day of Hanukkah, and this is the address. And he looks at her and with a kind of intensity, and he says, I'll marry you. And she says, you're just trying to say that so you can tell your pals you go to bed with a religious chick. But in fact, this is a very intense moment because he's challenging her values for a moment. We think and she thinks that, or he thinks, she thinks that if she just breaks out of the religious world, this might be her true beloved.
Talk about an Austen-like moment of social and religious commentary where
Wow.
she is unable to see him as an individual and only interprets him as a challenge to her faith.
That's right.
He is a test of how devout she is, and she squanders. Now she ends up fine because of the nature of the structure of the genre, but she completely blows what. Now maybe that would have been
The
a
truest,
short-lived.
it could have been, or it could have been the truest of true loves.
But I think the point is that she disposes of it because of her
Religious
commitment
world.
to this religious world.
That's right. So this movie is at the same time a critique and a kind of gentle expose of the limitations of this world, but also the comforts that it provides, because she's never alone. Her worry is always it's always with her sisters, and what we haven't told listeners is that what her profession is, and it provides so many of the wonderful moments. She runs a petting zoo.
A mobile petting zoo. Right?
Michali's petting zoo, and she runs around in this little tiny van with a snake and a
I'm not sure what the
rabbit.
market is like for that. I guess she plays a lot of 10-year-old birthday parties.
She's got a lot of gigs with Orthodox Jewish girls.
But
and
again, what religious tension in that scene where she is showing off this, the snakes,
where
a very symbolic
the
animal.
religious school
right?
marm will
Yeah.
not let one of her girls
Right.
touch the snake because
It's unseemly for
it's
a
unseemly.
delicate woman.
Yeah, and if it comes out that she's touched a snake, which I guess might have some bad religious, Eve and
Oh, and I think
sinning
quite
and-
explicit sexual significance too. Right?
Right.
We don't want any girls kind of
Yeah.
tainted by a sexual encounter.
See, the
even
more
with
we
an
talk
animal.
about this, the more
Yeah.
this movie opens up.
Yeah.
It's
And she's totally comfortable. I mean, talk about counter to what maybe the religious strictures may require. She's totally comfortable around these animals, right? She has no reservations about
Right.
being undone, or well,
Right.
maybe a little later on
Right.
she thinks maybe
And-
this is hurting my marriage eligibility. But
and the screenwriter and the director convey that, as they often do in this movie, by Mihaly looking at the more traditional school teacher who didn't allow the student to touch the snake, and they stare at each other, and both women know exactly what's going on here. That here we are in this world, and we're going to. It's as if they understand and appreciate their limitations as well as why they're there, and so much is conveyed without words.
so I brought up the visual strategy of Wonder Woman, and I want to make sure to bring it up here too, because you don't need to be a $100 million blockbuster in order to have a kind of coherent visual approach to telling a story. And I think that this is a good point to bring up a movie that both of us saw from 2 years ago called Get, the story of Vivian Anselm, which was another very small Israeli movie about a Moroccan Sephardic couple seeking a divorce in an Orthodox court in Israel. And the trajectory of that protagonist is kind of the opposite of what we see here, in that she is moving further and further away from her kind of religious devotion, and that is bringing her towards a position of independence. I mean, she's equally independent as the character here, but she's moving away from her religion, and also she is pushing back constantly against a very kind of rigid legal system.
But,
But what that movie does is that I don't know if you remember how claustrophobic the close-ups are in that movie, but we are
Yes.
constantly presented with these shot, reverse shot, looking at a face, then, filling up the entire frame, and then another face, an oppositional face, filling up the frame again. I found we were presented with a lot of close-ups here, too, in that we open with a close-up of the back of her head. We know that this is going to be a story kind of closely confined within the inner workings of this woman's head. But every single dinner table interaction, once we start getting into the moments of tension, it's like shot, 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 right? It's just we're burrowing into the face of the characters who are almost competing to see who can put the other into a position of subservience, or who can force the other into one of relenting on gender equality. It's a one that really, this is not just in one courtroom or not just in one room. The setting is much more expansive.
you mean in the wedding plan?
In the wedding plan, but I did
But-
find
but-
us confined to faces in a way that I found really helpful.
Well, you're absolutely right. I think the structure is utterly the same in the divorce. It's one courtroom scene after another courtroom scene, and in this movie, it's a charm bracelet of scenes with dating, the two people confronting each other. And I was just listening to how you described the back and forth in conversation, and that's another way to kind of think about what makes drama. There's the back and forth of this conversation, and who's up at the moment and who's down, who has been witty and who has been insightful.
It's conversation as contest.
It's conversation as combat and contest, that it's every bit as gripping, more gripping than what Wonder Woman is up to.
And the thousands of people dying. Of course, I don't know if Wonder Woman is consciously making a comment upon the meaningless suffering of war, but we certainly get presented with lots of lives meaninglessly lost on the battlefield, and it's true to the experience of World War I. So I don't want to discount that as misplaced or inaccurate,
Right. But here, what's lost is,
Yeah.
the thousands of things that are lost in these kinds of conversations is might have been. Did they say the right thing? What? Where are they? The conversation when people want something from each other is the essence of what plot is, and who's up and who's down, and
Plot and character, and talk about a tight narrative structure versus one that just balloons. I want to make sure to ask you about the ending of The Wedding Plan 2 and what you thought of that, because if we had a very kind of controlled, deliberative, tense structure throughout The Wedding Plan of these contesting conversations, I think one thing that I found myself very resistant to with the genre of romantic comedy, however well this one falls within it, is the kind of saccharine resolutions, in that inevitably you end up with the person who is in fact your life partner and meant to make you happy, and all of the drama was just pretext to this eternity of bliss that you get to look forward to. I don't think that that's the case here, but it's not an unsatisfying ending in that regard. I mean, she does end up, I found there was quite a bit of suspense at the wedding. I didn't know who was going to show up and take her away, but
you knew somebody.
But you knew
was gonna
someone
show-
was that something? I mean, is that a generic quality that you appreciate in this type of drama, or did you not see it coming? I don't know. How'd you respond to that end?
Well, I thought I was in the midst of like a wonderful situation, absolutely, what a great ride, and you're one of the movie's achievements is that you're rooting for this woman so hard. Everybody's rooting for her, but you especially are.
Even though she's in the wrong so many times, right? She's not a flawless person.
No, right, but she has faith in and she doesn't, and she's not. She doesn't wear it on her sleeve. It's true faith. I was actually, because I have a secular perspective, I was thinking that she might run off with a musician, and actually I thought he might show up at the end. But the more I thought about it, I realized that by the movie's terms and the character's own perspective, the groom who's going to show up had to be within her world, and it was really a kind of the shock of the inevitable, because she met this guy in the opening scene. The guy is the son of the woman matchmaker, and he is recommended to her that when she does find her husband, he can give her a good discount on the hall that he operates. So it was planted and it was harvested.
And to talk about an effective closing shot, I mean, if I knew that there was going to be some satisfying romantic resolution, I had no idea that the final shot we would see of this woman is her. I mean, for the most part, we've seen her. You know, her head isn't covered, right? She is dressed in a relatively like independent contemporary fashion. She doesn't, even though she prays frequently. There were little indicators to me that this is someone who is a very devout person. Now, maybe someone more familiar with that world would be able to pick up on little signs, but she looked like anyone else, regardless of where they fell on the religious spectrum, to me. But at the end, we see her all. I mean, she's so covered up at the end, right? She's wearing this kind of red headscarf that completely obscures this big shock of curly brown hair that she has. She has on these traditional earrings and makeup, and it's I found it a very interesting and odd kind of contrast with how we were presented with this kind of ferociously independent woman throughout the movie, and now at her moment of kind of deepest self-satisfaction, she is most engulfed by the religious world that she wants to be a part of. I found it, dissonance implies that it didn't work for me. It really did work for me, but I found it an interesting contrast.
Yeah, no, this movie is full of fascination. I mean, how are the men portrayed? I mean, in many ways, these women are kind of Amazonians of the Hasidic world in their own way. All the men are there for is, you got to marry a man. That's the world. They're not particularly wonderful. And in fact, the one time where we have a rabbi who's called in to kind of arbitrate, this guy is like the character in the Coen Brothers' A Serious Man. He's a schlump. He sits there. He's nervous.
He spends more time looking at his nails than looking at others.
He's useless. The movie seems to suggest that, men are there and you're supposed to marry them because it's in the Torah that you're supposed to produce children. But they really are. They're not particularly attractive. They're not particularly useful. They're just sort of part of the furniture of their world.
I saw that. So this movie is playing in a very small kind of side room theater at the Criterion, and I was the only. So there were only 3 people in the screening, including me. But the other 2 were a young couple speaking Hebrew, and I thought how wonderful that people in this. I know that I'm not sure if they're Israeli or if they live in New Haven, but it was wonderful to think this is an opportunity for people in the city to connect a bit more with the culture that they don't often see represented in movies, and to have such a well-made and satisfying movie as a result. I thought that was quite an accomplishment. But any final words on the way? It sounds like we both are on the same page on this movie.
Well, I think this is one of the situations where seeing the both movies together really increase the pleasure. That it doesn't always happen, but thank you for that.
Thank you for coming on the show and for chatting about these, Alan. And we will talk with you next week, another episode of Deep Focus, to find a complete archive of almost 2 years of shows. Go to deepfocusradio.com. But yeah, we'll catch up with you next Thursday at noon.
Thank you.
Well, that was wonderful, Alan.
It was fun. Yes, it was.
Thank you. Thanks for seeing us. Man, I feel like we are definitely not going to win any friends in the mainstream movie-going community. And there is something special about Wonder Woman. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's not special. The New York Times media columnist wrote this article about how in an industry where box office is an indicator of success, we have to come to terms with the fact that Wonder Woman is an incredible success, and that's a good thing for women being able to make movies about women.
Right, but I think it's fair to say the things that we said. We can't. I mean, you can't fool yourself. Why are the police here? We do something more.
No. Maybe an interview?
No, it's in the spirit of the wedding planning. You have to speak the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she, I didn't find her, I found her as flawed a character as I would hope to find. Right? She by no means had all the answers. Despite the way that she prioritized honesty, I found her, she wavered all over the place in terms of what she wanted in a person, what she thought of herself.
You know, in many ways, you could talk about this movie as a movie about faith,
Yeah.
and we didn't talk about that. But the original title suggests that it's about how to break through, how to affect God's plan for me.
Yeah.
Because there is this notion in these Hasidic communities that there's somebody out there who's called a Yerba Shert, which is Yiddish, right? There's one person truly destined for you, and if you're religious and you're a good, you live a religious life, God will connect you.
And talk
to
about
that person.
familiar to the world of Holy Romans. I mean, that's what movies are all about, and finding your true love. But to put it in that religious context is fascinating.
I thought it was so good. I actually thought it might have been made by the people who made The Get.
Yeah, it
Feels like it.
right. Maybe all Israeli movies.
Well, they don't throw money around. You know.
And I think both of these movies are made by women. I mean, that must be quite an aberration in terms of
Over there, I have no idea what their industry is like. You know, it's a real testosterone-driven culture too. You know.
I found that Bob Singer such a snake. Even though I liked him, I
Yeah,
thought,
this
oh
is-
man, this guy is up to no
He
good.
was the devil
He's
for sure.
right. Well, I'll be in touch about it next week.
All right.
Thinking of,
Yeah. So I'm in California June 23rd through
oh, okay.
29th or 30th. So
Okay, that's good to know.
if we do it, I could do it one more time. Whatever.
Yeah.
Let me
All right,
know.
I will let you know.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Yeah, come on in. Hello, how are you? I'm well.
Good to see you. Hope you don't eat the larger first week. I know he was like, wait, was he just like, oh my god. Wait, he's like this one. He's like that window's too small for me to get out.
I wish I was that
He's
big.
like, is that as an
Still
escape
bouncing.
route? Oh my gosh.
I'm happy to throw it in the SoundCloud now, or I can just send you a description. Whatever's easier.
Yeah, no, that's a long drive.
I can just send it to you.
I'll send you a
Oh, good,
file.
good. And we'll-
Oh
we'll
yeah,
make
that'd be
sure.
great. That sounds
And
great.
then let me get. Are we gonna? I think we're gonna need one more chair.
I'm afraid Alan wasn't the biggest fan of the movie either. But
So did you tell your?
Well,
Did you tell
you got a sergeant over there that was a big fan.
big
Oh,
fan of
Wonder
Wonder
Woman,
Woman.
did you see it?
I did.
It was good.
I liked it a lot. I didn't love it.
I didn't.
Yeah,
You're right. I didn't love it.
But
I liked it. It was worth watching.
oh, without a doubt. And I
you need one more chair, right? Or is that it?
Yeah, so you can put that right here, and then
That girl is gorgeous.
Oh my God,
The
Gal
one who
Gadot.
plays. Yeah, what's her name? Gal Gadot, right?
Gal Gadot.
oh, she is
Oh my
beautiful.
god. It's
They
hilarious.
did a great. They did
That
a
was a
great